Welcome to the 5th edition of Impact at BE, our recurring lecture series that looks at the co-benefits of what we do here at the School of Built Environment. How we not only generate new knowledge, but we use that new knowledge to improve life in societies, communities, and industry. So today's lecture is entitled Co-Designing a Methodology for Centering Young People in Disaster Recovery in Regional New South Wales. And we've got 4 speakers. Firstly, Dr. Timothy Heffernan, who is a postdoctoral fellow and anthropologist here at NSW Built Environment. Joining him will be Kathy Stewart, Alex Addison, and Kian Bellchambers from Anglicare, New South Wales. So over to you, Tim.
Thanks, Phil, and thank you everyone for coming today to today's talk. It's my pleasure to be talking about co-designing a methodology for centering young people in disaster recovery in regional New South Wales. So what we're going to do over the time we'll spend together this afternoon is I'm going to give an overview of a project called the Resilient Towns Initiative, which involved a lot of interaction and engagement with young people living in the Snowy Valleys. And then I'm going to be also speaking with some of my collaborators at Anglicare, and I've got a few structured questions, and we're going to have a bit of a Q&A after that. But I thought what we might do to begin is just hear from the collaborators, say hello. So, and Kathy, could I start with you?
Sure. Hi, Tim. Thank you for the invite this afternoon. So I'm Kathy Stewart. I started work in the recovery after bushfires through Snowy Valleys Council as bushfire recovery officer. Transitioned to Anglicare in January this year. So I'm a local in Snowy Valleys Council. I'm a local youth group leader, and yeah, work at the Batlow Hub for recovery for Anglicare.
Thanks, Kathy. Alex?
Cool. Hey everyone, I'm Alex Addison. I work out of the same office as Kathy with Kian, and we facilitate the Starting Fresh program, which is a youth program we run in Batlow, targeted at getting the youth in town engaged in physical exercise again and socialising again, and making we try and get their mindset to be aligned with making positive decisions.
Thanks for being here with us. And Kian?
Hey guys, I'm Kian. Yeah, so I'm Alex's upper half in Starting Fresh. And basically, yeah, we run a youth program that's continually evolving as we see the needs for the young people. And it's been really exciting to work with Resilient Towns so far.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Good to be with you. And I'm really looking forward to talking about what we've all been up to over the last sort of year and a half. We'll just swap the screens back over again. Okay, thank you. So over the last sort of 2 years, the organisations you can see along the bottom of the slide here have all been working together under the banner of a project called the Resilient Towns Initiative that's been operating in the Snowy Valleys LGA. For anyone who's not familiar, the Snowy Valleys is the area that's between sort of Canberra and Wagga in New South Wales, and it was quite badly affected by the bushfires during the Black Summer bushfires in 2019-2020. So together, the organisations that you can see on the slide have been working to support the recovery journey of 7 towns and villages within this one LGA. And this is a project that's been supported by the New South Wales government as well. Now, I've got to be honest with you, most of you are here to speak about, to hear about young people and to hear about what we've been doing in terms of our engagement methodology. What I'm going to start with is the project as a whole, Resilient Towns. The reason being is because what we did with each town and village, we actually adapted to the needs and the sort of aspirations of young people. So it might be best to sort of start broad with the whole project and then focus on what we did with young people in particular. So working with these different towns and villages in the Snowy Valleys, we were interested in trying to support their recovery journey, as I mentioned. And what we decided to do was design a number of engagement activities that could help with that journey. We started with the principle that's quite common these days in disaster management, especially disaster recovery, which is it's not about the disaster. So we didn't want to necessarily focus on people's experiences or focusing too much on the next disaster or something else like that might happen. Instead, we wanted to focus on the people themselves. So the town, the community, the services, the infrastructure, these kinds of things. And we started with the disarmingly simple question of, what would you do to make your community safer? And the engagement activities that we did were, they began with things like a town hall meeting where we heard about people's sorts of needs and wants and that kind of thing. That then turned into a workshop that was about sort of generating ideas so that we could, in the third workshop, build particular projects that would answer the question of how to make the community safer from the community's point of view. This was a process that was championed by all of the members of Resilient Towns, and it was something as well that was guided by Professor David Sanderson at the School of the Built Environment here. And we used the action planning methodology, which is one where we just asked people, as you can see on the left-hand slide, we asked people just to generate a lot of ideas to this question, and then what we did then was ask people to sort of vote on some of those ideas and what they thought was the most important thing that they wanted to sort of see built up into projects. Now, another thing that people in the disaster management space have been talking a lot about is the sort of like need and the focus on social ties and community ties, things like that, and the power that they have in sort of building recovery. And I just wanted to draw everyone's attention, excuse me, to some research that's come out recently, sorry, which has been looking at the strength of community ties and the role that it plays in people's recovery journey. So one study, for instance, found that the more groups that people were part of, more groups that people were part of before the disaster happened, meant that they actually experienced, a stronger sort of recovery. They were sort of experienced more resilient outcomes after the disaster. Now, many of you might be thinking, well, that sort of makes sense in regional areas where community ties are kind of everything. They're known to be strong. And something else that's come out too is this idea that there's certain groups, institutions, networks, that kind of thing in different communities that can help to actually foster and build some of those ties. Some work has recently been done on the role that schools can play in that. And as you can see, there's this report here that's been released today actually, which is on fostering community ties and harnessing learning opportunities to boost resilience. Now, speaking of schools, one thing we found in our engagement activities, and I'll just go back a slide so you can see, is that very rarely was there anyone that was young or sort of under the age of maybe 50 at these events. Primarily the people that would attend these events and therefore were sort of making decisions about what was happening in the community were people, in their sort of 50s, 60s and 70s. So what we thought we might do as part of Resilient Towns is to sort of build an engagement methodology that could specifically bring young people to the table for their sort of ideas, thoughts, aspirations, that kind of thing to be heard. And that's what I want to talk about today. So in terms of co-designing a methodology to do this, there were two sort of aspects to it. The first was that representatives from Anglicare and also from UNSW got together to build this program. So we sort of brought together all of our sort of resources, all of our capacities, these sorts of things, to build this engagement program. And then we worked with young people as well to build it and to sort of mirror what the adults did as well in terms of identifying particular things that they were interested in, building those up into projects, and then trying to sort of build those up themselves. And a few important parts here as well. First is that we sought feedback from young people along the way. And to that point, I just want to mention, I remember as part of these engagement exercises, I was pulled aside by a young woman who might have been about 16, and she said, you often look to sort of the older, younger people in the room, thinking that we might have the answers. And she said, you know, often I'm most surprised by what the 12-year-old, the 13-year-old is saying. So, you know, please look and listen broadly to what everyone's saying. So it was that kind of, you know, gathering feedback, hearing from young people themselves. It was really important within and also sort of outside of the context of these events. The other thing too is anything that might have been requested by young people, whether it was the kind of food we ate or the kinds of activities we did before and after some of the work, that was brought into and incorporated into the events themselves. And importantly as well, we fed back and received some advice from the broader Resilient Towns group. So there was a lot of kind of feedback and sort of support offered by the group as a whole. Now, one of the things that we tried to develop as part of these engagement activities was blue sky thinking. So what we did was we actually held these events with no adults there, unless you want to count me, Kathy, Alex, and Joanne as adults. We're probably more big kids at heart, but there were no real other adults there. And so what we did was we tried to actually get young people together amongst their peers and to be with their friends and that kind of thing in an environment that they found sort of supportive and that they sort of would flourish in. And what we said to them was, you know, like, it's your parents, it's your teachers, it's adults that'll tell you sort of, you can't do this for this reason or whatever. What we want to encourage in these events is blue sky thinking. So let's not worry, you know, about the cost, the feasibility, you know, the practicality of some of these things that you might bring up during the ideas generation. We'll come to that down the track, but for now, let's just generate a lot of ideas to this question of how to make your community safer. And so we really, really prioritise blue sky thinking. Now, what were some of the ideas then that came out? So what we tried to do was you know, gather all of these ideas, and there would have been, you know, over the course of many events, there would have been a few hundred sort of, you know, small and large ideas that were brought up. We put them into themes, and so some of those themes, as you can see on the screen here, were more things to do, and this is in the particular town of Batlow in the Snowy Valleys, more things to do that are safe in town. So that might be, you know, community things to do, sporting things to do. Public safety precautions as well, so improving, you know, the actual safety of the area, that can be really good. More resources and facilities to improve people's quality of life. So not just young people, but young people also had a concern for everyone in the community to be raising everyone's quality of life. And finally as well, regular communication, whether that's through some kind of channel that young people can speak amongst themselves or can speak, you know, to adults and receive information or instructions as well. They highlighted that as being really important for them too. Now this is, I think, the interesting part of what we tried to do, and that is often when we look at maybe the disaster management literature or the way that emergency managers and things like that sort of structure their engagement with young people, is that often the idea is that adults need to sort of bring young people into the process. You know, often because that might be there's some kind of barrier there, or young people don't know how to kind of become involved. So there's a sort of ushering in of young people into the process of disaster management, particularly disaster recovery. And what we tried to do by removing adults from the context was to find ways to get young people to come up with their own ideas that weren't sort of influenced by anyone else. That was just what they came up with their peers, and then to use those to bring adults along with their journey like that. So we actually tried to flip it slightly so that it wasn't young people that were sort of, you know, the ones expected to stand up, but young people doing their thing and then asking adults to step up and go along in that journey with young people based on these 4 themes and the projects that they came up with. And at the 3rd forum that we held, this is the one that was in Batlow, we then brought the adult community back into the situation. So we said, in a sort of presentation style, we said, look, these are all the ideas that young people have come up with. They're interested in this, and we had the themes, we had their vision for how they saw, you know, making a stronger community, and then we had some projects that they had identified underneath each of those themes. And we said, so this work's already been done. Now, what can you, as parents, as teachers, as small business owners, as just adults in the community, what can you do to sort of help get some of these projects off the ground? You know, and the philosophy we took was that in this room are all the answers. People know other people that might be able to assist with these things. They may be aware of different funding sources. You know, they may themselves be able to contribute, you know, time, resources, those sorts of things. So we tried to sort of go from that blue sky thinking back down then into saying, okay, what parts of these projects, which are kind of ambitious in some ways, what parts of these can we actually get off the ground through your help? And this is where that sort of social ties, the community connections are really important, because it's through the community doing that themselves and relying on those ties and networks that things can get done. And importantly, it happens from what we might call like a bottom-up sort of perspective, rather than, you know, the government or universities or whoever it might be coming in to sort of suggest what should be done. So to wrap up, I just wanted to also mention a few principles that we came up with. And these principles have been informed by the youth forums, but also some other sort of research that I was doing with people between the age of 18 and 25 in the Snowy Valleys as well. And the principles we've got here for stronger representation would be to champion a youth voice. So find ways to really push for young people to sort of find and express their own voice. And we were trying to do that through the youth forums and these engagement exercises. Provide continuous mentorship. So, you know, it should be that young people, you know, feel supported in their journey, and that there's a range of mentors, you know, at their disposal, from, you know, the people that are on, you know, as part of Resilient Towns, as well as schools, as well as community groups, as well as neighbours and things like that. Really importantly as well, participation wax and wanes. So we said from the very start of these engagement exercises as well, you've always got a place here. But sometimes we didn't see that person again, and that was fine, because we know that the journey that we started through these engagement exercises and the fact that we sort of documented them as we went meant that they could sort of come back at any time and sort of still be part of that process. And we wanted to really you know, welcome them into that, so they could come back at any time, or could continue on if they did come every time. Importantly as well, pair young people's interests with disaster management. Do young people, are they interested in the sort of bureaucracy and red tape of disaster management with a capital D and a capital M? Not particularly, but you know, there are particular interests that they might have which are really well suited to what people are trying to do through more official processes. So trying to pair those together. And finally, embrace and workshop rather than automatically reject young people's ideas. And we tried to sort of really champion this through the fact that we said, you know, write any idea down, put any thoughts down. Let's not sort of say no from the get-go. Let's not sort of like have any barriers to your to generating these ideas. Put everything down, and then we'll workshop them and we'll find, you know, what's feasible and what's not. And so underneath each of those 4 themes that I showed before, I'll just bring them back up. We asked everyone present at the forum to pick 2 particular projects, and there were quite a few altogether, but we asked them just to pick 2, which is actually quite a difficult thing for the room to do. But we thought it's better than, you know, having a long list of things if we can try and make a short list that people feel like they really want to get involved in. That's both young people and the rest of the community. So we encourage them to sort of shortlist them and begin working on 2. Before I go to my colleagues that I've got on the call as well, I might just say that one of the things that the Resilient Towns initiative has been really, has really focused on a lot is also building in legacy into this work. So, you know, we were operating here with government funding. It sort of followed the usual project cycle of starting, having a middle point and coming to an end at some point. So the idea as well was trying to build in some legacy. So it's like when the funding runs out, when the project actually closes down, how can these projects continue on? And a lot of the collaborative work that all of the different groups under the Resilient Towns banner did together have meant that some of this can continue on. So for instance, my 3 colleagues who I'm about to turn to now, they're all living and working in the Snowy Valleys, and you know, it's them and the networks that have been sort of built up and nurtured through this process that can continue on with some of this work. So that's a little overview, that's a lot of talking from me. What I'm going to do now is we're going to bring the screen up with our other 3 guest presenters. So we've heard a little bit about everyone's background. I thought I might just start with a question though of, can you tell me, so we've spoken here about this, the need to build a youth voice and the need to sort of focus on, building up the capacity of young people. But for those who don't know the Snowy Valleys and don't know people living in the Snowy Valleys, I wonder if my three colleagues here could tell me a little bit about, what is it like for young people in the Snowy Valleys, and what sort of what are the programs help with that you're involved with? So Starting Fresh and some of the other youth groups that Kathy's involved in as well. What's life like, and how do these programs assist with sort of building up young people?
Experience, at least. I mean, I'm a bit of a new arrival to the Snowy Valleys, I suppose. I've only been living in Batlow for 2 years now. But my experience, at least coming into Batlow, and I'd come from, I travelled in from Sydney at the time. And this was during the COVID pandemic, obviously, and Batlow to me seemed like a ghost town. I was living right near the park, where the skate park and the sort of whatever sporting infrastructure they have down there at Memorial Park is, and there was no one there. I'd go over there and play a bit of basketball on my own, and I'd rarely see anyone else. I mean, this was middle of winter, I suppose, and obviously during COVID, but it was very quiet. But I did notice over time a few of the youth would sort of come by on their skateboards or scooters or BMX bikes or whatever it was, and I sort of got to engage with a few of those just from having a basketball and just chuck it to them and getting to have a chat to them. And a lot of them were spending a lot of time at home, obviously doing school at home and also being at home just because of the isolation sort of rules. So getting to sort of talk to them and find out a little bit about what the town was like was good for me. And that was before about the whole Starting Fresh thing, and that opportunity came up for me. But it was really good that it did, because just chatting to some of these kids, they were identifying some pretty clear issues that I could note just in terms of they didn't really like the town. They felt like it was boring, there was nothing to do. They just didn't have any opportunities. I mean, Batlow and Snowy Valleys in general is a very geographically isolated sort of place. Batlow is pretty much right in the middle of the whole LGA, but you've got, Tumut's half an hour away, Tumbarumba's half an hour away. Everything's, half an hour or more away effectively to get to any decent shops or any kind of restaurants or just any places that are sort of fun for kids to hang out besides whatever, public infrastructure is down there. The skate park being the main sort of hub for them, which is in itself, and this has been a bit of a focus of the Resilient Towns project for us as well, and at least as far as the feedback from the kids was that the skate park in particular, that area needed some improvement, and Tim was great with helping us out with getting a bit of a stunt show and things like that going on, which we can elaborate on a bit later. But so my take on it was life was pretty boring. They didn't really have any understanding of what Batlow used to be, in terms of its quite heavy industrial sort of past, and all the agriculture that came out of there, and Batlow apples obviously everyone knows, but they're very disconnected from that, because the sort of as the industry left the town, you had a lot of working families leave the town. The median age has increased. I think it's 70 or something like that. So lots of aged persons in town. And then there's also this cohort of youth that are growing up in a place that's lacking any kind of new things happening, and the school is operating at a fraction of its original capacity.
So I've been in the sort of more Tumut but also Batlow areas for a little while now. I also moved around a lot when I was younger, so I've been in multiple small town environments growing up. I think for me, the most interesting thing is it's probably like many a small town, except that it has got a lot of amazing towns neighbouring it, but the ability for young people to go to those places is obviously limited. They can't drive themselves and all those sorts of things. So that often is taken out of the equation when people are thinking about what's around. They forget that the young people can't access those without their parents directly, and parents are quite often nowadays working and busy and that sort of stuff. So they are quite isolated in that sense. But in terms of how it is in the Snowy Valleys, it's obviously different town to town, but I think the common thread that we're seeing, and a lot of the things that we might, or at least I might point out, especially because of the study that I do, seeing it in practice and then going back to the theories of it, is just the just really noticing the diminishing of in society in general, the community involvement and the interpersonal interactions with people. And then COVID obviously has like emphasized that even further. So we simply don't have people running community events or volunteering or spending time with anybody, let alone youth. Which I think for a long time in our history has been built on a lot of that taking place. At least one person stepping up and running the soccer club, the basketball club, doing boxing with the kids, doing music lessons. These sorts of things don't exist in general, but then to add on top of that you can't then go and easily access someone for a paid service makes that even more difficult. So I think, yeah, just taking it out of the equation, adults aren't always thinking about the young people's means of getting places. And so they often think, well, if they're half an hour away, they can access this and this, but they simply can't actually get there.
Yeah, and I agree with all of those. So I'm a little bit older than Kian and Alex. So I grew up in Tumbarumba many years ago, and then moved away. So life in a small country town, population of 2,000 or less for Batlow, and other surrounding towns and villages, it's pretty unique. So you've got, I mean, there's pros and cons. There's definitely advantages. Small town communities, the close knit that Tim touched on earlier, slower pace of life. Like there's some amazing lifestyle in the country. But as Kian was saying, like, however, even though we're connected like through the internet and stuff now that we didn't have when we were growing up, there's still that real disconnect. There's that real feel of the youth being disconnected. We're not mixing socially as much as we were. Parents are out working, both parent. There's a lot of those, which is obviously the same in a lot of areas. I think, the big thing for me is that isolation, the dependence that youth have to get anywhere. That half an hour commute isn't just a half an hour through a suburbia. It's half an hour on country roads that there's nothing in between, even no mobile service. So it's a half an hour of country road and that sort of thing. So there's no public transport at all really for youth. We have limited access to appropriate age appropriate activities, fewer job prospects. So most youth believe that they have to go through school, they have to leave. There's a lot of them don't have a choice. If they want a career, if they want to further their education, they have to leave their community and their families 100 kilometres plus away. And if they do choose to stay, then they are limited to what jobs they can do, and it's usually lower paid and potentially could be less rewarding. I don't want to go there, but you've also got that small town mindset, which leads to less diversity. So you've got that smaller narrow-mindedness that we all hear about. The upside of that is that most of us know each other and there's that sense of community, but we all know each other and there's that sense of everyone knows your business. So it's a unique experience living in a small town.
Thank you. I think that's provided a really good background for everyone today. So thank you for that. Kathy, if I can stay with you, can I also ask, and we'll go back around to the others as well, but can I also ask, why do you think it's so hard for youth to be heard, whether it's about, disaster management or if it's about other things as well? Why do you think that is?
I think there's so many social barriers that hinder youth from speaking up. I think it's sort of the significant issue is the trust. They often will speak but get shut down. So there's that lack of trust that youth have with decision makers, whether it starts at school or parents or just society. It's that lack of confidence. Losing that connection with older generations, not having those mentors, and just not being taken seriously. They've kind of withdrawn to online engagements and those sort of things. So I really do think that it comes down to that. However, it's so vitally important that we equip them I think that we're missing that in education. We're missing that in homes. I think parents aren't exactly engaging well with youth to empower them to have a voice and to feel confident with saying something. Yeah. I could talk about that forever, but I
Thank
won't.
you. I think that's a good overview. Kian, do you have any thoughts as well on why it's hard for young people to be heard?
I'm a bit like Kathy. I could go on and on, but I'll be concise for a matter of time. I think, if you want to talk theories, a good example would be the socio-cultural development theory, when it talks about the gap between, the skills that you already have and where you want to be, and that model in between that person to bridge that gap and help you develop. It's simply, there is nobody bridging that gap for them anymore. And we seem to keep harping on about schools. Well, the reality is that schools are never designed to be doing all of these sorts of things. And it's simply not the same as that one-on-one interaction or, different scenarios and whatnot. So the reality is, as a society, we have to start, investing in our young people, but also it goes both ways. We find our young people really enjoy spending time with older people. Sometimes it doesn't matter what it is. They're just happy to be engaged in learning situations. And then they develop that voice. I think that's the other thing as well, is they have an opinion, but it's kind of asking someone who's has no idea about a situation. All right, what are your thoughts? And imagine how that feels on the spot to you. You might have some idea, but you need time to develop your voice. So it's not that you don't have it, but you need to develop it. And so again, we need a lot of people filling that space between, what they already know and where they want to be. And that looks like official capacities, but also just as a society, families, all that sort of stuff, as Kathy said, and as we're harping on, that interpersonal relationship, the intergenerational, all of that. It's across society, but then add on isolation, all of those sorts of things. It compounds. You've got to think about, a lot of people like to talk about technology for young people, but the reality I'm seeing particularly as well is that we all have devices. And the older people are just as much on their devices. Now, when I say older people, I'm talking older than the youth themselves. So parents, even some grandparents, as it's going through, are on their devices as well. So you're seeing kids at home who are actually overexposed to technology. They're kind of over it at that point. They're happy to be engaged in something else, but their parents are on the device after work and things like that. And so then all they have left is technology to turn to, and they haven't experienced that same interpersonal relationships, doing things as older people, to be able to have an appreciation for that. So unless they're exposed to it, how are they to know any better?
It's very well said. Thank you. And Alex, any thoughts?
It's one of the things that I think reasons why it's hard for youth to be heard, I suppose, is to me it's almost like you've got the up and coming generation right now, and this is probably a common trope across history, I suppose, like speaking a different language to a certain extent. And I think the technology really plays into that, where, for us, having a phone call with someone, or even the video call element of it that's sort of taken over during the COVID period, it's kind of old fashioned, right? Like these kids, they peddle memes and they're chatting on different chat groups and things like that a lot of the time. And the speed of their communication is quite, it's quite significant. They're often talking about things, and their frame of reference through social media for what's normal is often, what they see on TikTok or what they see on social media and things like that. So I feel like there's this certain divide that they struggle to cross, where they have to move from this interconnected world with their friends who are using the modern technology at a certain level, and then try and go to a meeting of a committee or something like that with adults, or try and discuss things formally, or even through these video call kind of settings. They're still very formal, and for these kids to try and understand, because they'd rather just get it all on paper and talk about it and vote on a poll or something, right? Like if they want to just do it quickly and get it done. So I think that's part of it, and a lot of it's just equipping them with that skill set to understand, hey, look, there's sometimes you got to take these things seriously and actually move into the adult's world to a certain extent, and if you do that,
you will be looked at, you know, with a lot of respect by the adults, and they'll take what you say seriously. And it's just empowering them and giving them confidence and the skill set to be able to do that. I think that's really vital.
Of course. So what do you think was successful about the youth forums, the youth engagement activities that we did?
Okay, absolutely. So the youth forums were exciting for me because initially when Resilient Towns looked to partner with Staying Fresh, that came off the back of small town conversations, which was very convenient. And we pitched sort of a bit of a concept of being able to leave legacy for us and how they can also do that and how we can work together to make that happen. So as we've just touched on, we've touched on a few different points about, needing the intergenerational gaps bridged because currently they're getting wider and wider. Part of that, I guess, the model of the forums developed over time, but being one that, yes, you can sit down and get the young people to do the blue sky thinking tactically as well, because being able to think like that allows you to brainstorm more freely and actually work through problems. So the young people were actually extremely observant. So when you actually give breathing room to allow them to get a roll on conversations, that's when you really start to see what they think. And it's just about like getting their confidence up, and once it's there, it's out there, and they were picking up on things that we didn't think necessarily just off the bat that they would be concerned for. There was a lot of safety stuff that they brought up about for older people in the community, which didn't necessarily affect them per se, as well as a lot of like logistic things like lighting, better footpaths. So they're very aware on that. I think as a society, we've pushed safety is quite a large thing, so they're very onto that sort of stuff, and they picked up on that. So one, allowing that breathing room, and as they conversed, more ideas came, and so that free conversation. But again, sorry, back to the main concept, the idea to bridge the gap was partly to allow them to think, but also for the young people to bring inspiration to the older people as well. And I say older people loosely, like anyone older than them is deemed older. So to bring it to the older people and say, because we can naturally say no, because we're in a world full of red tape, to say, here's the idea, rather than saying no, how about we say, how do we make it happen? Because in reality, that's how change takes place, is to come up with the concept and then to keep working through the problem and shifting it as you need to, but always getting to that end result, or at least as far along as you possibly can. And so to breathe some fresh air to the older people, but then the older people then to equip the young people by stepping them through what needs doing, what problems they might face, okay, and then they can brainstorm together, okay, well, what can we do about it, as opposed to what other avenues can we look down? What else could we do? How can this be altered? So there's a learning. It's that space, that provide that space for that learning. It also gave the younger people a bit of perspective, because we did some build-up forums of sitting down and thinking and having to put in a bit of effort to go, if you expect the older people to do these things for you, then they are going to have to sit down and spend a lot of time doing paperwork, doing all this sort of stuff, and you're not necessarily finding it super enjoyable. But by you doing that, you're stepping up and you're showing you're going to do your part, because you're going to then expect them to do that for you. And it builds a bit of there's room for critical thinking, for growth, that sort of stuff. I think critical thinking is something that we are not teaching our young people at schools as much as we claim to be, and even in universities it's just an assumption that we know how to critically think, but it's not actually necessarily being applied across the board. So you've got younger people coming straight out of school who don't actually know how to critically think properly into universities and that sort of stuff. So it was actually equipping them with those sorts of skills. So yeah.
Thanks, Kian. That was really thorough, and I think you raised some really good points there, particularly around some of our surprise about just how interested young people were in the sort of health and vitality of the whole town, not just their own sort of self-interest and things like that. So yeah, there was a lot there to digest from their thinking, and I think we were all really surprised and pleasantly surprised and really enjoyed seeing young people get to work. Alex, any thoughts?
Hello. Yes, I think a big part of the success of the youth forums was even just having yourself and Kathy and people come and sort of recognise these kids to a certain extent, right? Like it was Dr. Tim Heffernan's coming in to come and have a chat to you kids about what you want, basically. These kids have never been listened to before to a certain extent. They've never had someone come and put them in a room and say, hey, what do you guys want? Because then they get to actually sort of explore those ideas. And I think one of the real strong points of the whole Resilient Towns initiative in itself was the willingness to fund the BMX event that we held down at the skate park there in Batlow, which, I mean, that in itself, I think, I've still got comments about that today from some people saying, like, because we had, for those that unaware, we invited a professional stunt crew, Freestyle Now they're called, and they're sort of a collaboration of various stunt riders and BMX and scooter riders around the country. They came over with their own ramp, drove up from Melbourne. I think one of them flew over from WA, but we had the number one scooter freestyle trick guy in the country. He's 8th in the world, I think, and the 2nd in BMX come up to Batlow, to the little tiny skate park they've got there, set up their ramp, but then also run an entire day of workshops helping these kids understand safety, fix a few things on their bikes. They gave away a bunch of grips and different sorts of merchandise and gear, trained them and coached them, and then finished with this big stunt show event, which they also incorporated the youth into, which was just a great day. And it's something the kids in Batlow never would have thought would ever come to their town, for example. I mean, half an hour away, like I said, you've got Tumbarumba. They've got a big concrete skate park, and Tumit's got a nice concrete skate park. These guys have a little rickety metal thing that really isn't very good. But the fact that these guys came specifically to Batlow, ran this whole event for them, and are like world-renowned, pro riders, it's a pretty big deal. And it was for them, because a lot of them follow these guys on, social media and things like that. When they suddenly just turned up, it was a huge sort of like, wow, like people actually care about Batlow moment for a lot of them, I think. And having that co-badge, I suppose, with the Resilient Towns initiative and sort of what we're doing as well, definitely had a lot of goodwill sort of invested into the youth for that and coming to these forums and things. And I think that, that helped them to understand that, hey, look, people are listening to what we want, and that's sort of the focus of this idea. It's not just something that just come and get what you need and then we'll go. So that was very successful. I think the kids were really invested in it from that point, because they really saw that there was a chance here to get what they actually wanted.
Sorry, just on the back of that, I'll be very quick. I think Alex touched on a really good point. The BMX Day, I think, because we had some conversations separate to this with our young people, we were able to kind of flag, hey, this is something that they're interested in. But then Andy Ray came and actually just did a talk to the kids and then stuck around and listened to them. And they, said this is important. And then they actually delivered on something that was really relevant to these kids, not just because it's literally all they have. So it meant a lot to them, and it built trust. And I think that's a really, really big thing, because nowadays we often have a lot of people saying, oh yeah, we'll do this or we'll do that, or, think big, blah, blah, blah. But it was like evidence to them. And then it really empowered them to, step up and do all this stuff, because they realized people are actually going to follow through with what they say, and something might actually come out of this for real.
Well, I've got one more question left for today, and then we might have a minute or two as well for some questions from the audience. The final question, so given this event is all about trying to understand, some of the collaborations between universities and other sectors and the ways that they can work together, I'm wondering if we could hear a few quick thoughts about, any advice you would give to another organisation who might want to partner, say, with a university or an NGO or a business. What's the best way for, sort of outsiders to work with, local service providers, local youth groups, these sorts of things. Kathy, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, I think, like, following on from what Kiana and Alex have said there too, kind of they answered a little bit of that. But I think importantly, we need to prepare youth for leadership and leadership roles. collaborating with youth in decision making, and it does require a thoughtful approach. You do need to sort of go with the approach of like specifically for their needs, and provide something for them. So it's like a relationship, I guess, more than just this is what we're going to do. It's really important to listen to their needs, avoid making assumptions about what they want, because I mean, you know, like as Kian says, once you get older, it is really hard to understand. They do see life differently. We often hear decision makers and adults say, you know, that the children and young people are our future leaders. But I think it's really wise to start preparing them and giving them those tools so they can be. They're not, you know, they will be in the position eventually to be the leaders in the future. But we need to start equipping them now, giving them the tools, giving them training, and doing it as whether it be throughout the whole community, through schools, through parents, through mentors, through youth groups. You know, that's what it's all about. It takes a village. So we've got to equip them from that really young age to step up into those roles. You've got to show genuine interest in them. Like you said, if the youth had said, hey, we want this, and instead of bringing the BMX to the town, they brought something that really didn't help, you wouldn't have that buy-in, you wouldn't have, you know, that trust. So you've got to listen to what they really need and what they want. Build that, yeah, like we Resilient Towns has kind of like evolved to that serendipitous approach. And I think that's what, you know, going back to that last question, the success of it was that we used local people, or that the RTI collaborated with the local people that already had that relationship. Kian and Alex in Bartlow, myself and the youth group here in Tumbarumba. So they didn't come in and take over and just tell the kids what they needed or what they could offer. And as Kian said, we didn't offer them the world and deliver nothing. So, yeah, as far as anyone else coming into to areas, take the time to research it, talk to locals, grown-ups, kids, you know, really older people, and listen. Take a genuine interest. Don't just come in and think that you've got the answer. Let's splash some cash around. Do it with a genuine desire to help and to do something productive. So
sorry. Yeah, I think just expanding on what Kathy said, in terms of, you know, advice for other groups wanting to come into a place like this. I mean, this was my first real experience dealing with any kind of, you know, university or anything like that. And I think having Tim, especially as sort of our go-to person to talk to and communicate with, was really beneficial, because, you know, he's very, you know, friendly person. He didn't sort of come in and try and tell us what to do. It was more of just he had this concept he wanted to work with us on, and he was very collaborative with the whole thing, very flexible about how to do it. We had our first sort of meetings, and he went away and you know, it seemed to be was continuously revising his own sort of plan in you know, in reference to what we've been talking about in these meetings. That was really great to see, because it really adapted the whole thing along the way. And even in terms of, you know, how it was delivered, there was certain times where it's like, oh, you know, let's get a QR code or something to do check-ins on Google Forms to see if you get RSVPs for the food, so you have pizza for the day, to have the kids there, right? And just immediately adopts the idea and just goes with it, and it worked really well, I thought. So, you know, willingness to adapt and to take on sort of advice from us who are sort of in the town, I suppose, and on boots on the ground to a certain extent, and just adapt the program and then come and actually produce that there. So I think that worked really well. And definitely, I think that flexibility, you know, is important to undertake.
Thanks, Alex. That's a nice reflection. Thank you. And Kian, any thoughts as well about advice to other organisations?
Sure. Yeah, I think on the back of what Alex said, definitely, yeah, the ability to adapt and be flexible is necessary. The reality is you're working with people, and things will develop and grow and change and whatnot. So just being able to roll with that. Tim did that amazingly, especially with the two of us who just very like, right, we're doing this, we're all over the place. So that is what the success of this was. And also to realize that like things don't have to work in isolation. Everything is linked. So you need to really start looking at the whys, be very investigative, because things like the BMX day, I know we keep harping on about it, but the reason is because we actually were able to use it as an educational situation, not a sit down, but in a practical manner where, you know, it was able to, yes, prove that, you know, things can happen. The kids, we actually have a petition going now. They're looking into, you know, what safety things need to be done. It's become the next step to roll on with everything else. And then also, you know, out of gratitude, they started to come along and they've been upskilling themselves, and it was the motivation that they needed. But you're able to harness those moments and actually piggyback on them and make the most of them. So for the kids, I think it was far less about the activity, although the activity was perfect. It was just the proof in the pudding and all that sort of stuff. But yeah, just start thinking about the whys in the situation. Start connecting things. Things aren't always, you know, we like to, as people, I think because it's easier, right? The reality is, if I can just say, this is the thing that I'm targeting, then I don't have to think about it. Once you start trying to connect the dots, it's just, there's 1,000 trillion million dots, they just keep going. But the reality is, if you want things to take place, that's where you need to start going. And yes, you may not be able to, you know, do all of it, but what can you leave? What legacy can you leave that is going to continue the spread, the ripple on, that will initiate that next thing, that will, you know, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, if you guys are coming in, big events are good, but I think a lot of it too was the ability to partner with creating an event. But Alex and I were then able to work with kids on a regular basis. We meet with the kids like 3 times a week. So then we were planting seeds on a regular basis that then could flourish at the events. So the reality is, you need to actually invest in the people. Start asking why. Have people, as Kathy said, who are genuine, because they really can see through it. So you need to be really genuine. You need to be curious, and yeah, on the ground, hands-on, and flexible. That's the reality of it.
Thank you. Well, I just want to again thank our 3 colleagues here today that have graciously given up their time to come and speak. I want to know if everyone's happy to stick around for a bit longer, see if anyone had any questions for either myself or the rest of the team. If you have a question online, maybe put your hand up. If there's one in person, I can field those as well. We've got one in the room here, so we might start with that. But if someone online has one, please put up your hand and we'll come to you as well. Hi.
Yeah, thank you. You might understand the point of a PhD student in the environment and society group. I also being a course for disaster and society. So the first question I'm prompted is to push for that theme of disasters. Was that really quite obvious in the conversations you were having? Were the experiences of the fires still present in their minds? Did that kind of shape their contributions in some way? And then the second question, if I can, which is a little bit different, is thinking about viewing young people as a homogeneous group and actually kind of recognizing that they exist as very much intersectional people. And so did those intersectional experiences come forward, especially things like children with disabilities or LGBT plus children, Indigenous children, all of these types of intersectional experiences, did they come to your considerations at all?
If I may, I might start with the first one, and then I can pass along to everyone else. But as an outsider, what I always find really interesting when we've travelled to spend time in the Snowy Valleys is that you almost can't not forget about the disaster. I mean, there's still a massive fire scar on the landscape. You know, the way that the vegetation is growing back, you know, demonstrates that there's been like a mass sort of disaster happen in the area. So in many ways, you can't not sort of think about that, and it doesn't sort of not come into everything in a sense. I think the other side of the coin as well is that I think young people might be kind of sick of hearing about the bushfires as well, because you know, for all the right reasons, they were also protected as much as they could have been by
by adults. So I think for them, they're also kind of sick of hearing about it a little bit. That's probably my takeaway, but I'll obviously open it up to everyone else.
No, I'm sorry, the question wasn't all that clear. Like the question was, but the audio wasn't great. But yeah, I can reiterate what Tim said. Like, and I guess as a grown up, we were also evacuated, so a lot of people only saw before and the after, or they heard the stories, and there was a lot of stories and a lot of lived experiences shared, and obviously, you know, it was a lot of media attention, a whole heap of stuff. So you can't not think of it. But then having going straight into COVID as well, so they had that double whammy. And it was a big thing. We had a lot of government funded and non-government funded assistance for school programs and mental health and all that sort of stuff. So they were overwhelmed with so much at schools. Schools were just kind of like going, enough. You know, we've got a curriculum and which was a good. There were good things from it, but I think we underestimate the resilience of youth, of young people, to like not see it as such a big deal. Like they don't see the, some of them, like I'm not writing off, because obviously a lot of the older youth and the mid-age group are more aware of the economic effects and the you know, different things like that. So they're aware of it, but it doesn't directly affect them as it does a grown up with those sort of things. So they're fairly resilient and they're sort of fairly over it to a degree. But there were some that, you know, like the grown-ups, individual. So yeah, it's interesting. But we did certainly give opportunities. We had, especially early on, we had a lot of bushfire clinicians available at the meetings. For you know, if anyone had any triggers and things like that, and we certainly did with some at the Tumbarumba student council meetings that Tim actually didn't attend. But we did have student counsellors available the day that we went into the school there to talk to some of the youth about their experiences. That was early on. So, yeah.
Kian and Alex, can I direct you to the second question? Because I think you would have a real sort of good view of this. The second question was around, you know, obviously with these forums and these engagement activities, you know, sort of how did it go in terms of the fact that young people aren't a homogenous group? You know, there's different personalities, there's different intersectionalities as well, that mean that, you know, the biography everyone brings into the room with them means that they're sort of have their own experience of things, their own expression as well. So what would you say about that in terms of what you see through the Starting Fresh program, but also through the engagement activities that we have?
I mean, we have a fairly small group of youth. At Matlow, I think it's 120 kids all the way through K through 12 at the one school, right? And we have at our Starting Fresh group, in our sort of senior group, I'd say probably 15 or so on any given day on average, and then have a junior group about the same sort of size as well. So that's, you know, 12 to 17-year-olds in the senior group, 9 to 11-year-olds in the junior group. And they're all very unique individuals, 100%, and they're all, you know, they all share the common experience, obviously, of living in Batlow and growing up. And that's, for some of them have moved in recently from other places and things like that. And there's definitely a very diverse group. I think one of the great things about Starting Fresh and sort of the culture that Kian and I have kind of got going with these youth in this program that we run is that everyone is kind of all just, you know, we're all just the same people, and we all just get along, and we treat each other like adults, and we have respect, and we have these, you know, we start off every session effectively with the highlights of the day, you know, in a circle, just telling the group about the highlight of our day, effectively. And it's a really good way of just starting off and getting everyone to get an idea of what everyone else's lived experience is like on that day. Maybe they had a bad day, good day, whatever it is, and you can see the, you know, maybe someone's highlights just the fact that they got to leave school early, or they had breakfast or something like that, you know, and you can tell that there's something happening below the surface and whatnot. But yeah, I think that I mean, I guess Batlow isn't a hugely diverse place in itself, but at the same time, the unique experiences of all the people, especially because, like I said before, their exposure to social media gives them a view of the world in many ways that's sort of filtered from, you know, the USA, effectively. Like, you're getting, you know, a lot of TikTok content and things like that, which influences their culture, and yet they're seeing a completely different culture in their own town and whatnot. So it is interesting, and it's hard to know what's really going on with a lot of them. But they are seeming to be, quite honest about what, their struggles and things like that and what they deal with on a day-to-day basis with us, which is cool.
Yep. So in terms of engagement, so Battler isn't the only group of youth that I work with. I've worked in schools, I've worked at the Juvenile Detention Centre and a number of different places with different, obviously very different cohorts. So I think engagement takes a lot of, personal observation as well. Like, you need to be a little bit switched on. You need to learn how to read the room. And if you're not very good at that, you should bring someone in the room who can. You want to realize, like, just think about it, right? Like, think about your own capacity to engage. Do something that gets the kids moving first. Move them around, get their bodies, get the, blood flowing, then sit them down so they can concentrate for a period of time. Realize that it's okay if they have slightly broken attention, so long as it's not distracting of everyone else. So, having paper that everybody can access on, so if they want to doodle, or if they're not confident to talk, they can write down their answers there, and we collect all of that later. So even if you didn't know they're writing stuff down, you've collected that data. The unique position that we had was, obviously we had most of the people were coming to our Staying Fresh group already. Some of them weren't, so that was cool. But yes, we were able to build a lot of engagement prior to that. But there's a lot of different things with that as well. They weren't very connected in the beginning, and that's been established. But yeah, I think about having layering things. So when you go in, have a plan that could, if that doesn't work, you've got something underneath that catches and something underneath that catches, right? So you have a few levels of things. So we're going to have discussion, but they've also got pieces of paper or, you've got something else, we're going to mix and move them or whatever it is. But but also the ability to read the room. So if things are going well, okay, maybe I won't do that. But you have numbers of options so that if something's not working, all right, you shake it up and you try this. So go in with thoughts, preparedness for the fact that you might adjust accordingly, I think is important.
I'm keenly aware it's after 5, but I also want to keep the floor open if anyone does want to have a last question before we do head off. So are there any final questions either from the teams, people on Teams, or from anyone in the room? All right, I think that silence tells us we're done. Well, again, thank you to Kian, to Alex, to Kathy. This has been, sort of 18 months in the making. There really was so much success to what we did, and I really enjoyed the process, and also, the overview and sort of re-exploring it today as well. And so I really want to, again, sort of express my thanks to the three of you for, making this happen, really. And thank you for your insights and sort of thoughts today as well. It's been really useful.
Thanks, Tim. You're a legend.
Thank you.